Hi everyone, this is the JUSTPADRIDE snowboard channel. I'm Lars Horstman and this is the Stranda comparison review that I still owe you guys between the Cheater and the Pipeliner. I have to consider that some of you guys are watching this channel maybe for the first time with this very video, so I have to make this disclaimer over and over again. I am actually a Stranda Snowboards ambassador, so you could say there's some sort of bias going on here. However, in this case, it's me. I found the brand rather than the brand found me and then started paying me money or whatever. Working as a hard goods buyer for a shop here in Fernie in Canada. I found the brand, was curious about the product, ordered a few, rode the boards, absolutely fell in love with the Cheater in the first place, and then board after board kind of blew my mind. This is after, at that point, 28 years of snowboarding and about 8-9 years as a hard goods buyer. So I had ridden a whole bunch of boards, and literally what I was perceiving coming from these boards blew my mind. I'm a carving and powder turns kind of guy. I'm not a freestyle rider. I'm very much a directional rider. Stranda snowboards are claiming that they make the best stuff for powder and groomers, and literally every board I tried confirmed that. I just fell in love with the brand, and I'm actually really grateful that I'm now working with them and for them, helping with sales here in North America, and also as an ambassador doing my social media thing and this channel. So yeah, that's that. And the Pipeliner, this guy here, 1.85 m, and the Cheater, 1.70 m. Those are the two dedicated soft boot carving boards in the Stranda line. And I want to compare these two. I've done a few other Stranda reviews here simply because you guys were asking for it. And I always try to pick two boards that a rider that isn't familiar with the brand might somewhat throw into the same pot and feel like, I'm torn between this one and that one. And of course, with these being the dedicated soft boot carvers, this may happen depending on your size and your ability level. You might look at these two being confused as to which one to buy. So today I'm gonna clear that up for you. I'm going to start with the similarities between the two, and that is mostly in the wood core. So both boards have a 65% ashwood and 35% poplar core. Both boards are free of finger joints. Stranda don't do finger joints in any of their boards. That's awesome. And what that means is that all the strands, the wood strands that are in here, the stringers, they run tip to tail without any finger joints that actually would put two different kinds of pieces of wood together. And what that does is, of course, it eliminates unnecessary glue points, which are always points of like potential breakage, right? And also you get a much more consistent flex, obviously, right? Like you never know what kind of pieces are glued together in the factory. So Stranda don't do that at all. Gives the board a longer life, longer flex retention. That is topped off by the use of ashwood. Ashwood is a hardwood with a very high tensile strength and amazing dampening properties. So a huge part of how Stranda rides lies in the wood core, the epoxy they are using, as it cures, basically induces an elastomer, if you want to simplify this. And that's another layer of dampening that is literally everywhere, because of course your epoxy glues everything together. Then you have a bamboo top sheet that is printed on and then clear coated with multiple layers of lacquer that is then hand polished, and you can see through this beautiful design, you can actually see the wood grain of the bamboo, so the boards look pretty expansive and pretty fancy, kind of like a surf vibe going on here. And yeah, that's that for similarities between the two. The only difference in construction is really the choice of base material. While the Cheater gets what every Stranda board in the line has, that is a 4001 DuraSurf sintered base. Very durable, very fast, very easy to deal with. It's just black and pretty easy to fix as well. While that is on the Cheater and pretty much every other Stranda, the Pipeliner gets an Electra graphite sintered race base that is just another notch faster. And obviously bases at that kind of level, they all need good care, they all need to stay waxed so they don't dry out. But with the more you wax those bases, the faster they get, the longer they will retain the wax, and overall your efforts will pay off when you take those puppies on snow. Both boards, in my opinion, have one requirement, and that requirement is that the rider should be able and comfortable to tilt the board on edge and somewhat manipulate the radius and the turn shape through board angulation, like more angulation, more pushing into the center, tighter turn. You should be able to do that to a degree, rather than relying on skidding the board around all the time. When you buy a board with this amount of effective edge, as the Cheater and the Pipeliner offer you, you basically need to be prepared for a slightly more locked in feel, and also for a board that if you ever have to slide it around when it's on edge, there's more resistance, simply because there's way more edge in the snow, right? So if you are like, I'm sliding around a whole bunch, but I want to get into carving, well, I'm going to buy a Cheater. I think that step is too much. You can learn to carve, as in like basic, edge engagement and manipulation of your turn shape and size. You can learn that on just about every snowboard out there, as long as it's wide enough and it matches your weight somewhat, and lengthwise it should match your height a little bit as well. But you can learn that on every board. You don't need to buy a carving board that says carving on it in order for you to learn this. This could actually be counterproductive and bite you in the butt, because this amount of effective edge, if you cannot actually tip a board on edge and handle that, can make things feel kind of like cumbersome. Or for some people, it can be even scary at times. So we don't want that. And yeah, that is kind of like a minimum riding level requirement that I would want to say here about both those boards. Now, when it comes to the Cheater, it's in the name already. The Cheater is, in my opinion, a stroke of genius in regards to its overall design. The amount of things that play together and have been designed together in this board to create this very particular ride are incredible. And the Cheater, to a degree, actually counters some of the things that I just laid out here. So this idea of not being able to disengage the edge and slamming on the brakes, sliding out of a carved turn into like more of a braking kind of situation or skidding situation. The Cheater makes those things a little bit easier than some other boards. And part of that lies in the flex, and part of that lies in the camber profile. So when you look at, actually I think you can see this here quite well. When you look at this whole part of the board, like past the widest spot that's here, right there, widest spot of the board, the first, I want to say 12 to 15 centimeters are actually flat, right? Your nose here right at the contact point, this widest spot is what bites first and kind of creates that groove that you are then in your carved turn. And of course, if you take this camber here, that high camber from the center, if you extended this to the very contact point, this point would be under a lot of tension. The Cheater takes that away by stopping the camber somewhere here and then transitioning into a flat section, and then you have your contact point. The benefit of that over like a rocker type nose is that this contact point is actually still engaging somewhat immediately, where a rocker, the contact point is lifted off the snow, and as you roll the board on edge, you eventually get to engage the full length of the edge, right? So on the Cheater, you pretty much engage 98.5% of the effective edge instantly, but the tips are somewhat detuned. You find the same kind of core design here on the tail. The flat section is much shorter than in the nose. But basically, for your understanding, this design feature, the camber profile being more like a bell curve, that's how I like to call it. It's really high right here, and then it goes like this. That kind of profile makes for a board that has a lot of grip and power in the center and under the feet, but the tips actually allow for you to disengage that board. Now, you still have 1.43 m effective edge, which will make things feel more cumbersome if you are not up to par with your riding. If you are still somewhat, you know, the end of the beginner stage, I want to say that's just too much. Anyhow, the Cheater is pretty smart in that regard. It makes life much easier because this design feature adds a whole bunch of forgiveness. The next thing about this board that I always like to point out is people get intimidated by the overall length. They read 1.70 m and go, holy crap, that's a lot of board. I don't think I can ride it. Biggest I've ever ridden is a 1.58 m. Well, that's a fair point. However, the way you perceive length, so my channel is full of videos that dive deeply into these topics of like what's a right length, what's a good width, side cut radius, blah blah blah. Like I even made a video on the Cheater in particular where I explain all this in depth. I'm going to touch on this here again, but I might not go quite as deeply as I have in some of my other videos. So browse through my archive here and find whatever piques your interest. Anyways, what I like to talk about with the Cheater is the turn radius. So most boards, let's say around a 1.60 m length, have about an 8 meter turning radius. Now, these days, sometimes it's 7.60 m or 7.80 m. It's pretty close to 8 meters most of the time. Of course, with everything, there's always exceptions to that rule or norm. However, the Cheater being 170, you would think, well, that's got to be a 10 meter radius or something. It's not. It's an 8.5 meter radius. So it's a very deep side cut. And what that does is, if you consider that you're riding those 8 meter radii most of the time, and you jump on a Cheater and you tip it on edge, you will instantly get this sensation of familiarity. You'll be like, oh, it's actually not that long. It came right around. It turns pretty easily. One thing that enhances this is the nose flex. So in that area where this nose is actually flat, the camber profile that I just explained, the nose is also quite soft. And this part here is what shapes your turn. This first bit of your effective edge, that part of your nose, is what needs to flex and what needs to bend to create that initial turn shape. Now, the Cheater has the core being like milled pretty thin, so you have that soft nose, you don't have any camber, and the side cut is actually a little bit tighter. It's more around the 8 meter mark right here in the first 10 centimeters or 15 centimeters of that effective edge before it then blends into that continuous 850-ish turn radius. So you get a nose that really assists with getting into your turns. You don't fight the flex. The radius around 8 meters in the tip feels super familiar. It's not catchy and hooky because there's no camber. So all these things contribute to a board that for its size, even if you're not familiar with or not used to riding such boards, contributes to familiarity and rideability. So, and this is really why that thing is called the Cheater. One thing where Stranda will not really ever cheat is torsional stability. So all these boards are fairly thick in the middle. And this is the part that goes back to my earlier statement about how I don't think it's necessarily suitable for someone who's just leaving the beginner stage, because you will still be in the whole foot steering stage, and that means you're learning to change direction by sliding turns, by sliding your turns through foot steering, like pedaling. And obviously a torsionally stiff board makes that a little bit more problematic. However, this torsional rigidity is badly needed for carving a clean turn. Because when you think about it, when I put a board on edge and I rail through my turn, and now mid-turn I get all this kind of movement, every time a board that is on edge moves torsionally, it changes the shape of the turn, as in the line that the edge puts on snow changes. So you don't have a continuous kind of turn, and that's also where your chatter often comes in. If it's torsionally too soft, because it allows the nose of the board to create a different path than the tail through torsional twist. So then you get this chatter thing. Now, don't get me wrong here, this is hardly ever the board's fault. In the first place, it's the rider not being stacked properly or doing something funny, but a torsionally stiffer board definitely makes that sensation a little bit better. You'll still get chatter on a cheater if you are not riding cleanly, and that happens to me still, and it happens to everybody on any snowboard. It's never the board that's going to eliminate chatter on your heel edge. I'm going to make that very clear here. Anyhow, torsional rigidity. So this is where this board is really a carving board, right? And this is where somebody who is still sliding like 85% of their turns might be on too much board with this thing here. The cheater has 9 millimeters of taper, which on 143 effective edge is actually not that much. And considering that the board doesn't have a progressive side cut in the tail, as in the side cut radius in the tail does not get tighter, keeping the taper amount quite mellow actually assists with creating a board that wants to finish the turn going across the hill, that wants to really actually, you know, like finish the turn rather than open turn shape down the fall line. This thing really wants to come around. Watch my episode on taper. I'm explaining how too much taper affects that kind of characteristic of a board, and the cheater is definitely a board for S turns. It's not like bombing down the fall line type carving. This thing really is like surf style carving at its best. Staying above the fall line, always basically cleanly finishing your turns. That's really awesome on this thing. So yeah, who is this for? I want to say the cheater is for people who, as I said, are comfortable getting their board on edge and are feeling like, I want to try something more. I want to try something more specific. I actually want to start building a quiver. I want something that I'm not going to take in the trees, but that is just my groomer board, and therefore I want to experience a longer effective edge, because more edge in the snow equals more grip. And for somebody like this, the cheater is awesome because it's really a super nice pathway to get into those longer boards. It does make that experience pretty easy and achievable. It comes in 1.70 m standard width and 1.70 m wide. The standard is 260 mm waist, the wide is 275 mm waist. I guess that is clearly a question of ability level, which one you need. Of course, if you are tilting that board 88 degrees high on edge, you probably need the wide no matter what boot size you are. But take that, be careful with that. Like a board that is torsionally that stiff, if your boot size, let's say, you go by today's recommendations on a carving board. I'm very skeptical of riding these silly wide boards just to have zero overhang on both sides. I'm not necessarily a fan of that kind of recipe, but some people out there are, and it works for them. However, pair all these things together and you're in for trouble. If you have a board that is torsionally super stiff, well, it's not super stiff, but it's on the stiffer side torsionally, and now you put a size 8 boot on the 275 waist width, that's a lot of work to get that thing up on edge. And I do know that some recommendations out there would say, yeah, well, if you want to carve, you need the wide with your size 8. I'd take that with a pinch of salt, simply considering the thickness of the board in the middle. You'll have to work quite hard, and this will work well on perfectly pristine groomers at 9 AM, but as soon as things get choppy, those excessive waist width start working against you. The board gets more leverage over your foot than your foot has over the board, and that is simply exhausting. And if you don't need that kind of width, realistically, I wouldn't go for it. For reference, I'm a size 10 in a ride boot. The outside measurement and the inside fit of the boot equals, I think Burton is a pretty popular company for boots, a Burton 10.5, and my Ride 10 fit the same and have the same size. It's literally just a different number printed on the tongue. So just for you as a reference, and I ride the Cheetah wide in a 275 waist, I would consider that I fall into the expert carver category. I'm not perfect, but I'm definitely kind of up there. And with the 275 waist, I still boot out, but maybe every 2,000 turns when I really want to lay it out. Technically, I could ride that board 5 millimeters narrower, which doesn't exist. The 260 is clearly too narrow for me, but the 275 is technically a little bit too wide. So yeah, so much for picking your waist width there. I can't really help with that. That is something you need to test and experiment and find out over through trying different boards and probably over years of improving your ability of tilting a board on edge as well. Now, some people might be interested in the powder performance or freeride performance of this board. All things considered, there's two elements of this board that do make it suitable for riding powder, and that is the softness of the nose. As I said, this really wants to flex and come up and create lift, and the fact that there is a flat zone here with maybe like an inch worth of what you would call a rocker right in front of the contact points. So the overall nose of that board and the fact that the board is mildly tapered, I want to say yes, for such a actually fairly stubby kind of nose, this thing, due to its flex, wants to come up quite well, and I've ridden powder on that board. However, the thing to understand here is that, of course, a 1.70 m with a 143 effective edge is a lot of board, and if you don't have, so riding powder in trees is a lot about pivoting, right? You're not actually carving your turns through tight trees. It's more about fore-aft movement and pivoting the board almost under your front foot. So that's a lot to pivot around. I want to say, if your kind of powder scenario is high alpine, Switzerland, open bowls, that is what I used to ride before I moved to Canada, where you can do 10 turns on, like, 1,000 meters vertical. Yeah, the Cheetah will probably do that for you. It's probably really fun. I've ridden this thing in open terrain, like properly untreed open terrain in powder, and it's amazing. Would I want to take that in the trees? Hell no. This is of course also due to my overall measurements. I'm 5'9.5" and weigh 135 pounds. So, if I swing my upper body around, I do not create the same amount of rotational force and like momentum as somebody with 240 pounds that is 6'3". So, like a guy like myself, this thing feels heavy in tight terrain. And that is just counterproductive because I need to be quick on the board, right? So can it ride powder? Yes, definitely. Is it a tree board? I want to say no. 1.70 m for trees. Think about that. But yeah, if you are dabbling with some sort of open terrain free riding, this board will actually do this pretty well. If you like the content of this channel and my videos have actually helped you with anything snowboarding, please subscribe to the channel, like the videos, share them with your friends, even ring that pesky notification bell so you know what's coming up next. And in case of this particular episode, if you are after a Stranda snowboard and you cannot find a dealer near you or a dealer with stock, please feel free to go through the link, order directly from Stranda. The link is in the video description. That is a link that actually supports my channel. I get a small kickback from those sales and that is highly appreciated. It really helps me out because obviously these videos consume a lot of my time and I gotta fill my fridge somehow. If you otherwise want to support me monetarily, I have a platform in place called buymeacoffee.com. The link is buymeacoffee.com/justaride. And there you can tip me in form of a symbolic coffee. And the people who have done this already, they know who they are. And I really appreciate it because every coffee matters. Thank you very much. Let's get back to the Pipeliner. All right, the Pipeliner, what's going on here? I'm just going to give you a couple stats and specs here first that will give you a hint as to who this is for. So this thing comes in one size. It's a 185 with a 275 millimeter waist. The board has 13 millimeters of taper and the effective edge length on this thing is 1 meter 52.4, I believe. So that is a lot of effective edge. Sidecut radius is 10.5 meters in the center, or predominantly 10.5, and then the very tips, the very ends, turn, entry and exit, are tighter. They are 9.20 meters. Why would the company design it that way? That is pretty simple and pretty smart. A board with this amount of width and effective edge length and overall length, of course, that's a lot, right? Like it's a lot of board to maneuver around. And getting a board into a turn when the board is as long as this shouldn't really be too cumbersome because that'll just spoil the whole day and your whole experience. You'll just feel like you're on a plank. So what you really want is some nice easy turn entries so you don't feel like you're fighting the board. Therefore there's a bit of a tighter radius right in the tip. And then the same kind of goes for your exit because in order for a board to finish a turn nicely so you can actually control your speed, you want to tighten up your turn and bring it across the hill, right? Rather than bombing down the fall line. You can imagine that on a board of this kind of magnitude, if this was like super mega taper and basically like Sidecut being larger in the tail end than in the front, you'd have a board that just finishes turns down the fall line and you'd just be racing to the bottom, right? Like it wouldn't be Stranda's Powder and Groomer's surf style carving. It would be like chasing the fall line. And that is simply not the idea behind this board. Therefore, also the radius, like on a 185, 10.5 meter major radius, is actually not that large. It is compared to your average 160. Yeah, in this kind of league, 10.5 meters on a 185 is actually a pretty tight radius. And all of this contributes to a board that is actually rideable and turnable rather than just being a plank that you have to fight. However, the weight range on this thing is stated at, I believe, 70 to 110 kilos or 75 kilos. So that would be about 170 pounds up to 240 pounds. So that is the weight range for the Pipeliner. And I think that is pretty spot on. Considering that I'm 135 pounds, this board is definitely, for me, this board is a workout. It may not look like that, but I can only ride this and bend this properly without actually chattering out and the board like ramping up too hard on my little weight by applying good technique and pretty accurate timing. Like I can generate force through a turn by simply lowering my center of mass as I enter fall line and really bring everything, like basically throw everything at the apex of the turn, so that I, at the point in the fall line where the board bends the most, that I'm really like pushing at that moment. And that's pretty rewarding for me, because that board gives me a lot back when I come out of those turns. But yeah, I can't do that for 4 hours, right? So basically, yes, if you're lighter, if you're below that weight range or at the bottom, you can ride it, but you should be a pretty darn experienced rider with like pretty good technique and the ability to actually generate force through the turns rather than just passively tipping it on edge. So what is this thing for the bigger guys among us? So this thing is kind of a purpose-built powder and groomers type dream board for bigger guys. When you look at the camber profile comparing to the Cheater, there's no flat zone or rocker in the tail. The camber extends to the very contact point. That makes for a very powerful tail, a tail that is super supportive through your turns. And I guess if you are 200, 220 pounds, that's exactly what you want as well. And then when you look at the nose, this is where Stranda basically relies on tried, tested and true. A tiny bit of rocker combined with a softer flexing nose and then this slightly tighter turn entry radius here. That simply assists with getting into your turn pretty easily. Now, what this also does is that for a guy with the right size, that this board can actually be quite a good freeride board. And I'm not talking, you know, technical tight terrain freeriding, I'm talking bigger open spaces. This board floats really well. Like there's a lot of plank, right? It's 275, 185 long, there's a lot of wood. Combine that with this kind of nose shape and the softer flexing rocker nose. The rocker is about 10 centimeters from the contact point here. So that gives you a lot of lift and a lot of float. So if you're like a big guy, whatever, 6'2", 6'3", and 200, 220 pounds, this thing can probably be a bit of a dream machine for both powder and groomers. For people at the bottom end of the weight range, riding this in powder, obviously the float's going to be amazing, but this board has quite some swing weight to it if your physical dimensions are actually a little too little to deal with the force that this board generates when it like swings around on you. Like I could not, I can't turn this on a dime as in a skidded or like a pow turn type thing, right? Like it's too long for my weight. My upper body movement, my rotation will not generate enough force to bring this around quickly underneath my feet. So this is something to consider, but of course a 185 is not built to do this. I do get these questions, however, how is it in the trees? Well, duh. But yeah, people do ask those things, so, you know, consider what it's built to do, and that is carving. And that it does insanely well. And this goes back to the Stranda Magic Flex formula, which is slightly stiffer torsionally, so the board doesn't like wobble out on you between the feet, but therefore tips that actually want to flex and create a nice, smooth, consistent turn shape. So to sum this up, what if you are in between a pipeliner and a cheater and you still haven't been able to make up your mind after all my explanations? I think a good idea is to start with boot size and your overall dimensions. The cheater coming in a 260 and a 275 waist gives you two options, where the pipeliner you are 275 waist. If that works for you, that's great. If it doesn't, there's no other option. I personally think boards of this kind of, with this kind of waist width, 275, you should not be anything, like realistically speaking, I would say you shouldn't be under a 10. But I do know that there are people riding 290 with a size 9. So who am I to say what's right and wrong? I think this board is torsionally pretty stiff. It's a lot of board with a lot of effective edge. So if you're like a size 8 and you're on a pipeliner, that's probably too much, and it probably is going to be quite exhausting to get that on edge all day. In that case, Cheater 170 standard width 260 is probably a better choice. Overall, the personality of the boards, I think both have this very smooth, calm, damp, predictable kind of carving feel to them. You can tighten the turns on both of these really well. So like managing your speed is really easy on either one of them. So that's not really, you know, there's not much difference in that regard. But the Pipeliner is clearly the more aggressive one. Like the fact that you have camber all the way into the tail, overall I want to say it's a bit of a higher camber than on the Cheater as well, and that the board is simply thicker and built for a heavier person that makes this thing overall more aggressive. In particular, if you're at the bottom end of the weight range and you do match the width with your boot size, you could pick the Pipeliner purposefully if you wanted a board with like even more powerful like rebound, right? Like your lighter weight will be shot out of the turns much more with the Pipeliner than if you were 220, 230 pounds. So if that is something you desire, yeah, sweet, this could be a good choice as well. But overall, there's a very simple thing going on here, and that is that the Pipeliner has been built for those people that struggle finding a board, like people who are 6 foot plus, 6'2" or whatever, and 200 pounds, quite often are on boards that are, you know, for like carving purposes or faster freeride power riding. They're just kind of underboarded. Like there's just not that much offering out there that they could choose from. So the Pipeliner kind of fixes that, and this, as much as the Cheater as well, is like kind of, in my opinion, the pinnacle of soft boot carving. I absolutely love riding both of those. If I'm up for a workout, I'm going out on the Pipeliner and get even more reward out of that. But mostly you will find me on my Cheater 175 wide. Yeah, and really, like, it's up to you. There's lots of variables. The journey of finding that right board is quite subjective, and I can only assist with guidelines, but I cannot make that decision for you. So I hope the info I provided here today gives you a bit of an idea of where you stand and what board you might want. And yeah, pick your poison. They're both pretty special boards. All right, take care everyone. Happy turns out there, and keep digging trenches. Bye-bye.